For 3 years everyone in Cedar Valley believed that Sarah Thorne had died of fever, taking her unborn child with her. Her husband Jacob had become a ghost of a man, unable to love, unable to trust, unable to believe in anything but grief. But when a stranger arrived, claiming to be Sarah's sister, a sister who supposedly never existed, she carried proof that Sarah's death wasn't what it seemed. And the secret she revealed would either destroy Jacob completely or give him back everything he thought he'd lost forever. The November wind cut across the Colorado Plateau like a blade, carrying with it the promise of the harsh winter to come. Jacob Thorne stood on the porch of his ranch house, watching the last light fade from the western sky, his weathered hands gripping a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. 3 years. 3 years since Sarah died, and still every sunset reminded him of the way her auburn hair caught the light when she stood in this same spot, waiting for him to return from the cattle drives. 3 years since he'd lost not just his wife, but the child she carried, both taken by a fever that had swept through Cedar Valley like wildfire. Jacob had survived. Sometimes he wondered why. At 35, he looked older than his years. Grief had carved deep lines around his gray eyes and turned his dark hair prematurely silver at the temples. He ran the Broken Arrow Ranch alone now, having driven away every hand who'd tried to help, every neighbor who'd offered comfort, every well-meaning widow who thought she could heal his broken heart. He didn't want to be healed. He wanted to hurt, because the pain was all he had left of Sarah. The sound of approaching hoofbeats broke through his brooding. Jacob's hand moved instinctively to the colt at his hip. Visitors were rare, and in his experience, unexpected company usually meant trouble. A lone rider emerged from the gathering darkness, hunched against the wind and clearly struggling to stay in the saddle. As the horse drew closer, Jacob could see it was a woman, her dark cloak whipping around her in the wind. She was riding a lathered bay that looked ready to collapse, and when she finally reined in at the hitching post, she nearly fell from the saddle before catching herself. "Please," she called out, her voice carrying a desperate edge. "I need help. My horse. She's about to founder, and I have nowhere else to go." Jacob remained on the porch, studying the stranger with suspicious eyes. She was young, maybe 25, with a kind of delicate beauty that spoke of careful breeding rather than frontier hardship. Her clothes, though travel-stained, were well made, and her speech carried the refined accent of someone educated back east. "Nearest town's 10 miles south," Jacob said curtly. "You can water your horse and be on your way." The woman looked up at him, and Jacob felt his breath catch. In the fading light, her eyes looked startlingly familiar, the same unusual shade of green that had belonged to Sarah. But that was impossible. Sarah had been an only child, orphaned young, with no living relatives. "Please," the woman said again, swaying slightly on her feet. "I've been riding for 2 days straight. I'm looking for Jacob Thorne." Jacob's hand tightened on his gun. "Who's asking?" "My name is Elena Martinez." The woman reached into her cloak and pulled out a sealed envelope. "I have something that belonged to your wife, something I think you need to see." Jacob's blood turned to ice. "My wife is dead." "I know," Elena said quietly. "That's why I'm here." Against his better judgment, Jacob found himself stepping down from the porch. There was something about this woman, something that tugged at memories he'd tried to bury along with Sarah. As he drew closer, the resemblance became even more unsettling. Not just the eyes, but the shape of her face, the way she held her head. "Water your horse," he said gruffly. "You can rest in the barn tonight, but come morning you're gone." Elena nodded gratefully. "Thank you. I promise I'll explain everything." "Don't," Jacob said sharply. "Whatever you think you know about my wife, keep it to yourself. Some things are better left buried." But even as he said the words, Jacob found himself watching Elena tend to her horse with the same gentle efficiency Sarah had shown. The way she murmured to the exhausted animal, the careful attention she paid to checking its hooves and legs, it was all achingly familiar. Inside the barn, Elena settled her horse in an empty stall before turning to face Jacob. In the lamplight, the resemblance to Sarah was even more pronounced, and Jacob had to look away to keep from staring. "You have questions," Elena said. "I have nothing," Jacob replied coldly, "except the desire to be left alone. She used to talk about you, you know, in her letters. She said you were stubborn as a mule and twice as proud, but that you loved deeper than any man she'd ever known. Jacob spun around, his face dark with anger. I don't know what game you're playing, lady, but no game. Elena reached into her traveling bag and pulled out a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. These are from Sarah, written to me over the 5 years of your marriage. The last one, she held up a single sheet of paper, her hand trembling slightly. The last one was written 3 days before she died. Jacob stared at the letters as if they were serpents. Sarah didn't have any family, she told me she was alone in the world. Because that's what she had to tell you, Elena said softly. Because our father made her promise never to acknowledge me, never to admit I existed. Because I was the shameful secret he couldn't afford to have exposed. You're lying. Elena opened the most recent letter and held it out to him. Read it. You'll recognize her handwriting. Jacob refused to take the paper, but he couldn't stop himself from reading the words visible in the lamplight. The handwriting was unmistakably Sarah's, the same flowing script that had filled the love letters she'd written him during their courtship. My dearest Elena, the letter began. I fear this may be the last time I write to you. The fever has taken hold in the valley, and I am with child. If something happens to me, you must know the truth about why Papa made us pretend to be strangers. Jacob's vision blurred. Stop. She loved you, Elena continued, her voice thick with emotion, more than anything in the world. But she also loved me, and she lived with the pain of denying my existence every day of your marriage. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper. Why would she hide a sister? Elena was quiet for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. Because I'm not just her sister, Jacob, I'm her twin sister, and our father couldn't afford to acknowledge me because, she took a shuddering breath, because I was born out of wedlock, 6 months before Sarah. Jacob felt the world tilt beneath him. What are you saying? I'm saying that Sarah and I shared the same mother, but different fathers. Our mother was engaged to Richard Sterling, Sarah's father, but she had an affair with a Mexican ranch hand named Carlos Martinez. When she discovered she was pregnant with twins, she hid the pregnancy until we were born. Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. Richard Sterling took Sarah as his legitimate daughter and gave me to the Martinez family to raise. He made Sarah promise never to acknowledge me, never to speak of me, because my existence would prove his fiancée's infidelity and destroy his reputation. Jacob sank onto a hay bale, his legs no longer able to support him. Sarah lived with that secret for 25 years. She lived with it every day. And when she married you and found happiness, it only made the pain worse. She wanted so badly to share her joy with me, to have me at your wedding, to tell you about the sister she loved but could never claim. The letters, Jacob said numbly. How did she send them without me knowing? Through Dr. Patterson. He was the only one who knew the truth, and he forwarded her letters to me in Santa Fe. When Sarah got pregnant, she wrote to me about how happy she was, how excited you both were about the baby. Elena's voice broke. She also wrote about her fears, about the fever spreading through the valley, about what would happen to you if something happened to her. Jacob looked up at Elena with haunted eyes. What happened to her? What really happened? Elena pulled out another letter, this one shorter and written in Sarah's increasingly shaky handwriting. She was dying, Jacob. The fever had her, and she knew she wasn't going to survive. But before she died, she made Dr. Patterson promise to find me, to tell me the truth, to make sure I knew how much she loved me. But why come here now? Why wait 3 years? Because Dr. Patterson is dead, Elena said quietly. He died last month and his widow found Sarah's letters among his papers. She sent them to me along with a letter he'd written but never sent, explaining everything. Elena handed Jacob a final letter, this one in Dr. Patterson's familiar scrawl. Jacob's hands shook as he read the doctor's account of Sarah's final hours. Her delirium-fueled confessions about the sister she'd never been allowed to acknowledge. Her desperate wish that somehow Elena would know she had been loved. She died, calling for both of us, Elena whispered. You and me, the two people she loved most in the world, but who were never allowed to know each other. Jacob crumpled the letter in his fist, his body shaking with 3 years of suppressed grief finally finding release. All this time he choked out. All this time I thought she died alone, that I failed her somehow. But she was thinking of you too. She was missing someone I didn't even know existed. Elena moved closer, her own tears falling freely. She didn't die alone, Jacob, and she didn't die feeling unloved. Patterson said she smiled at the end, said she was finally going to see her mother again, and that she wasn't afraid because she knew both her husband and her sister would carry her memory. Why didn't she tell me? Jacob's voice was raw with pain. Why didn't she trust me with the truth? Because she was afraid, Elena said simply. Afraid that if the truth came out, it would destroy not just her father's reputation, but yours too. A man's wife having a half-Mexican sister born out of wedlock, in a place like Cedar Valley, that kind of scandal could ruin everything you'd built. Jacob stared at her, seeing not just Sarah's eyes and Sarah's face, but Sarah's courage in coming here. Sarah's compassion in the gentle way she spoke of painful truths. She was protecting me, even at the cost of her own happiness. That's who Sarah was. She loved so deeply that she was willing to sacrifice anything to protect the people she cared about. They sat in silence for a long time, the weight of revelation settling between them like dust after a storm. Outside, the wind howled through the rafters, but inside the barn there was a strange sense of peace, as if Sarah's presence had somehow filled the space where her secrets had once hidden. "What happens now?" Jacob asked finally. Elena looked at him with eyes that held both hope and uncertainty. "I don't know. I came here because I had to, because I needed to tell you the truth and honor Sarah's memory. But I don't expect anything from you. I know I'm a stranger, and my presence here probably brings more pain than comfort." Jacob studied her face, seeing not just Sarah's features but something else, a strength that spoke of a woman who had survived being cast aside, who had built a life despite being denied her true family. "Where have you been all this time? What kind of life did you build?" "The Martinez family raised me well," Elena said. "Carlos was a good man, and he loved me as his own daughter. I was educated, learned to speak English and Spanish fluently, taught to manage a household and handle business affairs. When Carlos died 5 years ago, he left me his small ranch outside Santa Fe." "You run a ranch alone?" Elena smiled, and for a moment, Jacob saw an echo of Sarah's quick wit. "Just like someone else I know. It's not easy, but it's mine. Or it was, until I mortgaged it to pay for Dr. Patterson's care before he died." Jacob's eyes sharpened. "You're in financial trouble?" "I will be if I can't make the mortgage payments. But that's my problem, not yours." Elena stood brushing hay from her skirt. "I should let you get some rest. I'll be gone in the morning and you can go back to your life." "What if I don't want you to go?" The words surprised Jacob as much as they did Elena. He hadn't planned to say them, hadn't even realized he was thinking them. But looking at this woman who carried Sarah's face and Sarah's gentle spirit, he felt something stirring in the depths of his chest that wasn't just grief. "Jacob," Elena said carefully, "I didn't come here looking for charity. I came to honor Sarah's memory and give you the letters she wanted you to have." "I know why you came," Jacob said, standing to face her. "But I'm asking you to stay, not out of charity, but because," he struggled to find words for feelings he'd thought were dead, "because for the first time in 3 years, I don't feel completely alone." Elena's eyes filled with fresh tears.
You feel it too?
"The sense that she's somehow still here when we're together?" "Yeah," Jacob said roughly. "I feel it, and I think maybe that's what she would have wanted for the two people she loved most to know each other, to take care of each other." "I don't want to be a replacement for her," Elena said quietly. "You're not," Jacob replied. "You're her sister. And maybe you're exactly what I need to learn how to live again." The next morning dawned clear and cold, with the first snow of winter dusting the mountains in the distance. Jacob found Elena in the kitchen, having somehow managed to prepare breakfast from his meager supplies. She moved around the space with the same natural grace Sarah had shown, but there was something distinctly her own in the way she hummed softly while she worked. "You don't have to wait on me," Jacob said, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. "I wanted to thank you for letting me stay, for listening to the truth about Sarah." Elena sat across from him at the rough wooden table. "I know it couldn't have been easy to hear." "It wasn't," Jacob admitted. "But I needed to hear it. I've been carrying 3 years of guilt, thinking I should have done more to save her, should have seen the fever coming, should have been a better husband." You were a wonderful husband, Elena said firmly. Every letter Sarah wrote was full of stories about your kindness, your strength, the way you made her laugh. She never doubted your love, not for a single day. Jacob felt some of the tension he'd carried for years begin to ease. What were you like as children? Sarah never talked about her childhood much, said it was too painful. Elena's face softened with memory. We were inseparable until we were 5. Even though we lived in different houses, we played together every day. Sarah was the brave one, always climbing higher, running faster, protecting me from the older children who teased me about my father. And I was the one who got us out of trouble with stories and clever excuses. That sounds like Sarah, Jacob said with the first genuine smile he'd worn in years. She could talk her way out of anything. When Papa made us stop acknowledging each other, it nearly broke both our hearts. But Sarah found ways to stay connected. She'd leave me notes hidden in our favorite tree, little gifts tucked behind loose stones in the old church wall. Even as children, she was determined that our separation wouldn't mean the end of our love. As Elena spoke, Jacob found himself seeing Sarah in a new light, not just as his beloved wife, but as a complex woman who had carried hidden pain and secret love throughout her life. The knowledge didn't diminish his memories of their marriage. Instead, it deepened his understanding of the woman he had loved. I want to show you something, Jacob said, rising from the table. He led Elena to the bedroom he had shared with Sarah, a room he hadn't entered since the day she died. The space was exactly as Sarah had left it, her brush still on the dresser, her favorite shawl draped over the rocking chair she'd used while mending. Jacob opened the top drawer of the dresser and pulled out a small wooden box. These are the letters Sarah wrote to me during our courtship, he said, opening the box to reveal dozens of carefully preserved papers. I read them sometimes when the loneliness gets too bad, but now, he picked up one of the letters and handed it to Elena. Now I can see things I missed before. Elena read the letter with growing wonder. In it, Sarah wrote about her happiness at finding love, but also about her sadness that she couldn't share her joy with all the people who mattered to her. At the time, Jacob had assumed she meant her deceased parents. Now he understood she was thinking of the sister she couldn't acknowledge. She found ways to include me in your love story without you even knowing it, Elena whispered. Look, she mentions wishing she could wear the blue dress that would make her eyes look like emeralds. That was my dress, Jacob. She saw me wearing it to church one Sunday and told me later that it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Jacob felt tears prick his eyes. She wore a blue dress to our wedding, said it was her something blue. She was carrying part of me with her on the most important day of her life, Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. They spent the morning going through Sarah's belongings together, with Elena sharing memories that gave new meaning to items Jacob had treasured but never fully understood. A locket that contained not just Jacob's picture but a tiny pressed flower that Elena recognized as coming from their childhood hideaway. A book of poetry with certain passages marked verses that Elena revealed had been their secret code for expressing love when they couldn't speak freely. She never stopped loving you, Jacob said as they carefully repacked Sarah's treasures. Even when she was loving me, part of her heart was always with her sister. And part of it was always with you even before you met, Elena replied. She used to tell me about the kind of man she hoped to marry someday, strong but gentle, serious but with a hidden sense of humor. When she wrote to me after your first meeting, she said it was like meeting someone she'd been dreaming about her whole life. Jacob felt something loosening in his chest, some knot of grief that had been choking him for 3 years. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. I don't know how to stop mourning her and start living again. Maybe you don't have to choose, Elena said gently. Maybe loving her memory and building a new life aren't opposite things. Maybe the best way to honor Sarah is to find happiness again, to let the love she taught you grow into something new. Jacob looked at Elena, really looked at her, seeing not just Sarah's face but her own unique beauty, her own gentle strength. Are you saying you'd consider staying permanently? Elena's breath caught. Jacob, I can't ask you to save my ranch or solve my problems. That's not why I came here. I'm not offering charity, Jacob said, stepping closer. I'm offering partnership. You need help saving your land and I need help remembering how to live. Maybe we can help each other. What about the people in town? What will they say about Sarah's husband taking up with a Mexican woman? Jacob's jaw tightened, Let them talk. Sarah died keeping secrets to protect other people's comfort. I won't dishonor her memory by doing the same. Elena studied his face, searching for any sign of doubt or pity. Instead, she saw something that made her heart race, the beginning of genuine affection, not for Sarah's sister, but for her. If I stay, she said carefully, it has to be as myself, not as a replacement for what you lost. I know the difference, Jacob said, reaching out to touch her face gently. You have her eyes and her smile, but you're not Sarah. You're Elena Martinez. And he paused, struggling to voice feelings that were too new and fragile for easy words. You're someone I'd like to know better. Elena leaned into his touch, feeling the calluses on his hands that spoke of honest work, seeing the pain in his eyes that was slowly giving way to something like hope. I'd like that too. The first snow began falling that afternoon, large soft flakes that blanketed the ranch in pristine white. Jacob and Elena worked together to prepare for the storm, checking on the cattle, securing the outbuildings, laying in supplies for what promised to be a hard winter. Working beside Elena, Jacob was struck by how naturally they moved together, how she seemed to anticipate his needs and complement his efforts. It wasn't the easy familiarity he'd shared with Sarah that had been built over years of marriage. This was something different, a harmony born of shared loss and tentative hope. That evening, they sat before the fire, reading Sarah's letters together and sharing stories about the woman they had both loved. Elena told Jacob about Sarah's childhood dreams of traveling the world, her secret ambition to write a book someday, her talent for drawing that she'd hidden from everyone except her sister. Jacob, in turn, shared memories of their marriage, Sarah's terrible cooking when they were first wed, her habit of singing off-key while she worked, the way she'd curl up against him during thunderstorms because she was afraid of lightning. She wasn't perfect, Jacob said, staring into the flames. I think I've been remembering her as a saint for so long that I'd almost forgotten she was human. She was beautifully, wonderfully human, Elena agreed. Full of contradictions and secrets and impossible dreams. That's what made her real. Tell me about your life, Jacob said, turning to face Elena. Not just your connection to Sarah, but who you are on your own. Elena smiled, tucking her feet up under her in the chair. I'm probably not what you'd expect from a Mexican ranch woman. Carlos made sure I was educated. I can read and write in 3 languages, keep books, negotiate with suppliers and buyers. I love mathematics and astronomy, and I have a terrible weakness for romantic novels. You run a ranch and read romantic novels? A woman can be practical and romantic at the same time, Elena said with a laugh that reminded Jacob achingly of Sarah. Besides, after spending days dealing with ornery cattle and broken fences, sometimes you need to escape into a world where love conquers all and every story has a happy ending. Do you believe that? That love conquers all? Elena's expression grew serious. I believe love is the strongest force in the world. But I also know it requires courage to work. The courage to be vulnerable, to trust, to forgive. Sarah had that courage. She loved you completely despite carrying the pain of our separation. She loved me faithfully despite the risk it posed to her marriage. And you? Jacob asked quietly. Do you have that kind of courage? Elena met his eyes directly.
I'm here, aren't I?
I rode 200 miles alone to tell a grieving widower that his wife had secrets that might change everything he thought he knew about their marriage. I'd say that took some courage. Jacob smiled, the first genuine, relaxed smile Elena had seen from him. I'd say you're right. They talked late into the night, the conversation flowing easily between shared memories of Sarah and personal revelations about themselves. Jacob learned that Elena had been managing her ranch successfully for 5 years, that she spoke 3 languages fluently, and that she had a quick wit and an infectious laugh that was distinctly her own. Elena discovered that beneath Jacob's grief-hardened exterior was a man of surprising depth and gentleness, someone who read poetry in private and had built his entire ranch with his own hands because he believed in creating something lasting and beautiful. When they finally said goodnight, Jacob felt lighter than he had since Sarah's death, not because his grief was gone, it would always be part of him, but because for the first time he could imagine a future that held more than just surviving from one day to the next. The blizzard that began that night lasted for 3 days, trapping Jacob and Elena together in the ranch house with nothing but each other's company, and the gradually warming atmosphere between them. By the time the snow stopped and the sun broke through the clouds, something fundamental had shifted in their relationship. It started with small things. Elena humming while she cooked, Jacob catching himself watching her with appreciation rather than just recognition. The way she laughed at his dry observations about the weather, the way he found himself telling her stories about his childhood, his dreams, his fears. On the third day as they worked together to dig paths through the snow, Elena slipped on a patch of ice and Jacob caught her before she could fall. For a moment they stood frozen in each other's arms, her face inches from his, both suddenly aware that what was growing between them had moved beyond friendship or shared grief. "Elena," Jacob said softly, his breath visible in the cold air. "I know," she whispered. "I feel it too." They didn't kiss that day, but they both knew they were balanced on the edge of something that would change everything. That night they sat closer together by the fire, and when Elena's hand brushed Jacob's while reaching for her coffee cup, neither of them pulled away. "Are we betraying her memory?" Elena asked quietly, her fingers intertwined with his. "No," Jacob said with certainty. "Sarah wanted both of us to be happy. She would want us to find each other, to take care of each other. I think," he paused, struggling to put his intuition into words. "I think, maybe this was what she was hoping for when she wrote to you about me all those years. Maybe some part of her knew." Elena nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. She always said love had a way of finding the path it was meant to take, even when the road seemed impossible. The next morning brought news that would test their newfound connection. A rider arrived with word that Elena's mortgage payment was due in 2 weeks, and if she couldn't pay, she would lose her ranch. The amount was staggering, more than most working ranches could raise in a season. "I have to go back," Elena said, her face pale with worry. "I have to try to find the money somehow, or at least salvage what I can before the bank takes everything." "Or," Jacob said quietly, "you could let me help." Elena shook her head immediately. "Jacob, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm offering." Jacob took her hands in his expression serious. "Elena, I've been alone on this ranch for 3 years, slowly dying inside because I couldn't figure out how to live without Sarah. These past few days with you, I feel alive again. I feel like maybe I have a future worth fighting for. That doesn't mean you should bankrupt yourself for my problems." "What if they weren't just your problems?" Jacob asked. "What if we faced them together?" Elena's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying marry me," Jacob said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not because you look like Sarah, not because I'm trying to recapture the past, but because you're Elena Martinez and you've given me back my life. I'm saying I love you, not Sarah's memory, but you, and I want to build a future together." Elena stared at him in shock. "Jacob, we've known each other for less than a week." "I know it's crazy," Jacob admitted. "I know it's too fast and too complicated, and probably the most impulsive thing I've ever done, but Elena, some things don't need time to be true. Some things you just know." Elena felt tears streaming down her face. "What about the town? What about people who will say you're dishonoring Sarah's memory?" "Let them say what they want," Jacob said fiercely. "Sarah is gone, and nothing will bring her back. But you're here, you're real, and you're offering me a chance at happiness I thought I'd lost forever. If that's not worth fighting for, then nothing is." Elena looked into his eyes, seeing not the broken man who had greeted her with suspicion and anger, but someone who had found the courage to love again despite the risk of loss. "Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure this isn't just gratitude or loneliness or—" Jacob silenced her with a kiss that was gentle but unmistakably passionate, a kiss that spoke of genuine desire rather than mere comfort. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Does that feel like gratitude to you?" he asked. Elena laughed through her tears. "No, it feels like—" She paused, searching for words. "It feels like coming home." "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes," Elena whispered. "But Jacob, I need you to know I'm not trying to be Sarah. I'm not trying to fill the space she left. If we do this, it has to be our own love story." "That's exactly what I want," Jacob said, pulling her close. "Our story, starting now." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Cedar Valley, with Dr. Patterson's widow serving as witness and the few townspeople who had known and respected Sarah offering their cautious blessings. The gossips whispered, of course, but their disapproval was drowned out by the obvious happiness radiating from the couple. Elena wore Sarah's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, but she carried wildflowers from the meadow where she and Sarah had played as children, a bouquet that honored the past while celebrating the future. As they exchanged vows, Jacob found himself thinking not about what he had lost, but about what he had found. Elena wasn't Sarah, would never be Sarah, but she was something equally precious, a woman who had loved his wife as deeply as he had, who understood his grief without being consumed by it, who offered him a chance to love again without forgetting what he had loved before. When the ceremony was over and they walked out of the church together, Jacob felt Sarah's presence like a blessing rather than a ghost. She had given him Elena in the end, just as she had given Elena him. It was, he thought, exactly the kind of miracle Sarah would have believed in. The years that followed brought their own challenges and joys. Elena proved to be not just a loving wife but a true partner in running the ranch, her education and business skills complementing Jacob's practical knowledge and hard work. They expanded the operation, built new buildings, hired good hands who respected Elena despite her heritage. The town slowly warmed to Elena as they saw how she cared for Jacob, how she honored Sarah's memory while building her own relationships with the community. When the fever returned to Cedar Valley 5 years later, Elena worked tirelessly alongside Dr. Patterson's replacement to care for the sick, earning the respect even of those who had initially disapproved of her marriage. Jacob never forgot Sarah, never stopped loving her memory, but he learned that the human heart was large enough to hold both grief and joy, both remembrance and hope. On quiet evenings when he and Elena sat on the porch watching the sunset, he sometimes felt Sarah's presence like a gentle breeze, a reminder that love was never truly lost, it simply changed form. Elena gave him 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. And with each birth, Jacob marveled at how life continued to surprise him with gifts he hadn't known to hope for. The children grew up knowing about Sarah, honoring her memory as the beloved first wife who had loved their father deeply and whose sister had become their mother. On the 10th anniversary of Sarah's death, Jacob and Elena made a pilgrimage to her grave, bringing wildflowers and stories of the life they had built together. As they stood hand in hand beside the white marble headstone, Elena spoke the words that had been in both their hearts for years. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind. "Thank you for bringing us together, for teaching us both how to love without fear. We carry you with us always." Jacob squeezed her hand, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "She knows," he said simply. "Wherever she is, she knows we found each other, and she's happy." As they walked back toward their ranch, toward the home they had built together, the children waiting for their return, the life that had grown from the ashes of loss, Jacob reflected on the strange paths that love could take. He had thought his story ended with Sarah's death, but it had only been the end of one chapter. The rest of the story of Jacob and Elena, of healing and hope and the courage to love again, was still being written, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of grace at a time. And somewhere in the wind that whispered through the Colorado pines, Sarah's spirit smiled and blessed the love that had grown from her own love, the family that had been born from her sacrifice, the happiness that proved once and for all that love never truly dies. It simply finds new ways to flourish. If this story of love transcending loss touched your heart, if you believe that the deepest grief can give birth to the most profound joy, then you found your home at Western Love Stories. Here, where the frontier tested every heart and love was never guaranteed, we tell tales of souls brave enough to love again after devastating loss, of hearts large enough to honor the past while embracing the future, and of the truth that love is never wasted. It simply plants seeds for new love to grow.